Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today on our webinar with Clarisse on strategic innovation. I'll hand over in a few seconds. If you've got any questions, please either type them in the chat box on the right hand side or raise your hand or put them in the questions box, and then we'll get to them at the end of the webinar. Okay, so I'm handing over now to Bart to start talking about the program.
Okay, thanks a lot, Tanya. I'm gonna go immediately to slide number 3, where we really try to create a program where we ask the question: how do you create an environment that is different from the corporate environment, but conforms to its logic, rules, and structure at the same time? So what we are asking ourselves, if you are a company that wants to strategically move into a new direction or innovate your business model or engage in business model innovation, how do you create a structure that helps you to set up such projects, which is a bit different maybe from your main structure, but at the same time not too different, so that if you develop projects, they also get adopted by the business units. And we are basically interested in business model innovation as an overall umbrella. So these are projects that are typically have deviating business models from the mainstream or from the main corporate business model, and that might have a technological angle, or usually have some technological angle somewhere. So if we go through the program, then we would address the strategic challenges that market leaders have through business model innovation. So more specifically, we would start the program with a case discussion of Bühler. Bühler is a market leader in the food processing industry. Food processing industry is undergoing extreme changes, especially when it has to do with meat and other kind of processing machinery for meat. People are having different tastes, and also there's more need for proteins that come from other sources than meat. And that company has to strategically innovate into the broad range of protein food and insects in particular, and has to build an ecosystem of all kinds of companies that commercialize insects for feed and food in Europe. And this puts a lot of challenges because for Bühler, as a market leader, that means that they will deal with potentially disruptive innovations, such as the insect businesses, and they have to think about how do we proactively make sure that we do not get disrupted. How do we build an ecosystem that is in our interest, that fits the business model we currently have, while actually the market that they are addressing is extremely different from the market we are addressing today. So the strategic challenges we discuss is how do you deal with challenges that come here 5 to 10 years from now that might need different business models, that might attract a lot of interested startup activity, and how do you as a large company manage that ecosystem in your benefit proactively rather than reactively as a company reacting to some things that you observe. And the reason why we have chosen Bühler is because it's a company that's in a very contemporary situation, confronted with this in an emerging industry that all typically understand the food industry. A lot of companies try to set up corporate innovation labs or corporate innovation settings or corporate labs in order to deal with such innovations. And so in the second part of the day of the program, we start to deep dig into how do you internally, as a company, set up a corporate innovation lab that helps you to proactively deal with challenges that you might have in the future that again deviate from your business model. In other words, how do you disrupt as a corporate? How do you try to disrupt as a corporate in the future? And we will also try to analyze how you structure those programs that enable such entrepreneurial initiatives. There's many different variations. You have innovation labs, hackathons, all kinds of lean startup kind of programs, method-based activities. They all are used by companies, but the question is, how do you do that? Because on the one hand, stimulating entrepreneurial activity might something that you want, but on the other hand, the outcome of that entrepreneurial activity should still be something that you can implement in a business unit. So the question is then, how do you structure these things in such a way that they are not deviating too much from your initial intention, but still bring something that is quite novel to the company? And what are then the main challenges when you set up such innovation labs? So in the program, we will basically focus on three main challenges that we see corporates tend to have when they set up their corporate innovation environment or corporate innovation labs, when they have decided to strategically move into one direction. The first challenge they typically have is a challenge of process versus structure. That means a lot of companies are very process oriented, most businesses are process oriented, most corporates are specialized in optimizing processes to deliver a product of high quality, to make the delivery as efficient as possible, and so on and so forth. Whereas actually the entrepreneurial initiatives and small projects, they do not fit very well in processes. So on the one hand, what you see is that companies look for processes to use in an entrepreneurial corporate innovation lab, such as lean startup methods or business model canvases or blue ocean strategy kind of templates, where they try to develop a process that neatly fits the expectation of a corporate environment. But on the other hand, by using such a process, they actually kill the kind of innovation they want to stimulate. So you need to find something of a balance between the process you want to adopt to comply and the structure you want to create to incent people to come up with initiatives and projects that are a bit different from the projects that you might have envisaged. The second challenge that we discuss in the program are exit strategies. A lot of companies are quite good, I would say, in starting labs in order to get projects off the ground during the first 3 to 6 months. And they have all kinds of methods and incentives to do that. But when it comes to exiting these projects, in other words, to transfer them to business units or to spin them off or to have the learnings distributed in the company, then we see that a lot of the companies struggle and they fall short of having successes to do that. So they more or less are very good in initiating projects, but then when it comes to later on exiting the projects, there's a lot of hassle, there's a lot of problems, there's a lot of things that could be done better. So we will focus on those exit strategies and the different pros and cons of these exit strategies and how you can do that. And the third challenge we focus on in the program is branding. A lot of companies are extremely concerned about the quality brand they have. And then when you start new projects, it becomes, of course, very difficult to sustain that brand, or you're gonna have a kind of lean startup prototype or minimum viable product that you're gonna deliver to your current customers at the expense of the branding of those current customers. So you don't want to jeopardize your brand for something completely new, for something emerging, if you're very brand focused. So how do you do that? On the one hand, having business models or new business models that emerge or new innovative projects that you incent in your company. And on the other hand, make sure that your current customers don't think that the brand is getting jeopardized or that the brand is diluting through doing that. So these are like the three main challenges that we discussed in the program. After that, we first looked at the strategy. And each of these challenges has a lot of elements in there. If we talk about facilitators versus process managers, then we see that creating a corporate innovation culture requires facilitation. So you see a lot of companies that set up entrepreneurial garage lookalike type of labs. So a lot of companies try to have an environment separate from the corporate offices where people can go to and develop ideas into, let's say, better projects. And they have all kinds of environments like 3D printing or all kinds of symbols they use, like garage style kind of things to make the environment more susceptible to do that. But at the same time, we also see that a lot of these people start to implement processes. So some of them use user design kind of processes where people are doing all kinds of persona thinking and then develop personas and develop them into user journeys and have touch points in these user journeys and make a whole process to come to business cases. Others follow a clear lean startup approach where you have a business model canvas you start from, and then you go to customers in order to find out whether what you develop in an agile way makes sense or not. And once you have your customer feedback and your iteration loops, you do customer acquisition, and there's all kinds of rules of thumb that emerge in terms of the number of customers you need to visit in order to be on the safe side or not. And these kind of processes all make sense. But what we also see is that the processes make sense because they comply with the environment that normal business units are familiar with, a very well-structured process environment that leads to high quality. But when you then look at the entrepreneurial part of it, then you see that most of these teams that are in such an environment, they don't like to use these processes. They want to be much more free. They want to think out of the box. They want to develop business cases without being bound to a lean startup method or to a design method or to any process that happens to be the standard process in such a corporate innovation environment. And so what you see is that there is a balance that needs to be found between the extent to which you use processes to stimulate or manage innovation as a process versus the environment you want to create, the incentives you want to give to people, the time you want to give them to work on a project that might be worth pursuing in the future, and give the freedom to do that. So that's the first kind of question we have, facilitator versus process managers. And we do a lot of kind of questions about that. We look at the pros and cons, we deep dig into optimal combinations. We look at time, budget, and space that you want to have. How much space do you want to foresee for your corporate innovation lab? How much time do you want to give people to work on projects? What is the budget they need early stage? How does that budget change when you go later on? Is that budget something that needs to be given at the corporate level, or is that something that should be financed by sponsors in the company, in the business units? Is that budget something they should bid for or not? And to what extent do you need to develop methods then to manage all that, like lean startup, where you build, measure, learn, or design thinking methods where you more or less guide your people in order to design something completely new and then learn from that user journey or whatever journey you create with them. The second block that we basically discuss is about exit strategies. A lot of companies have already these labs where you have 3 to 6 months time, part-time, maybe 20%, sometimes full-time, where you develop a project from an idea into a proof of concept stage. And a proof of concept is typically not technological, but it's more like a business proof of concept, a business model proof of concept where you have user feedback, customer testimonials, people that are trying to give you all the kind of ideas that you need to convince others. But then, of course, you go into the next stage of a project where you think about what are we going to do after 6 months? Who's going to take this up? Typically, you have only a small team of people working on it who do not have a lot of resources, and the expectation of what they're doing is not extremely high. And then you're having this question about how are we now going to take this one step further? Who's going to lead that project into a business case? How are we going to upscale it into a new business unit? Who is going to upscale it? What are the challenges to upscale? Are we going to transfer it to a business unit? Are we going to merge it maybe with other projects that are already happening in the business units or in the corporate innovation lab? To what extent do we think about selling? Are we going to work together with corporate venture capitalists? Do we have a corporate venture capital fund ourselves that we talk to and that we can learn from? Or are we going to set up collaborations with independent venture capitalists that are financed by institutional investors? And if we do so, how do these collaborations have to look like? And what is going to be the stake of the company in that? And how do we deal with employees that are going to transfer to such a spin-off if we want to sell it? When do we decide to liquidate? I have examples of projects that went on for 15 years in companies until they were decided to be liquidated. Not because they, and usually these projects are not 100% clear negative cases. There's always a reason why they continue for many years, but then all of a sudden the company decides that it's not within their strategic interest to pursue these projects, and the people that have been working with it feel abandoned. They've been working on something for several years that all of a sudden is not important anymore. So how do you incent these people? How do you make sure that the knowledge they have developed, that the learnings from such a project do not disappear from the company, that you can still use these learnings to do something with it? How do you make sure that projects get liquidated in time, especially when you think that they might be interesting but strategically not important and not interesting enough to sell them? All these kind of questions happen throughout the whole project and corporate innovation, and should be part of the whole process of discussion in such a company. So what are potential exit strategies? How do you structure also the sales process? So that's also an important thing. What we see is a lot of corporate setup entrepreneurial initiatives, but the people that are populating the corporate innovation lab are not entrepreneurs themselves. They are employees of the company that get incentives to do something outside their job. And so very often they're very happy to do something outside their job. They're very happy to have a little bit more freedom to be sure that they can do something that is not necessarily reporting in a very traditional daily way to their line managers. They're very happy to go do something, but they are not entrepreneurs themselves. Entrepreneurs typically sell a lot. They sell to customers. A lot of entrepreneurs would see their daily job as a sales process. And what we see in companies is that within a corporate innovation lab, the people that are idea owners don't do that kind of selling. They are not going around in the business units to convince people about their project or try to convince their customer, which might be the business unit managers, about what they have. They typically focus on developing the content of the project, and then after 6 months think that somebody is going to buy it. And that's not the way it works. So how do you get these corporate sponsors on board early on? How do you organize the networking? That is part of a typical sales process. The networking where entrepreneurs would go to various forms of bourses, where they would meet potential leads and potential customers. But in this case, where you would go inside the business unit to meet potential people that might be your natural buyers. All these kind of questions is what we discuss in exit strategies. And then finally, how do you deal with brands? Corporates are extremely concerned about the quality of their brand. They do not want to dilute the brand through experimenting with new innovative ideas. It's not because you have a company that has a very nice quality brand that you want to have your customers being confronted with some new experimentation you set up that might be of much less quality. So what you typically see is the tension where companies on the one hand want to do something innovative, sometimes even with a deviating business model, but on the other hand don't want their current customers to be confronted with that new thing because what they deliver is not yet of the value what is typically delivered in their mainstream businesses. So on the one hand, you want to do something new, but on the other hand, you don't want to jeopardize your corporate brand with that something new. So how do you create a label that helps experimentation in the company without being too closely associated with the mainstream brand of your company? So a white label, let's say for corporate innovation, where you allow people to do something within the umbrella, but not exactly use the brand that is well known maybe amongst your customers. So that basically there is some loose, tight coupling between your brand and the white label under which you innovate. And there's lots of examples of such white labels that have been introduced quite successful to the market. But again, they need to be structured in the company. You need to make sure that this is something that as a company you fully support and that it makes sense. And then we come back to the Bühler example where we started the program, where they entered the insect market under a completely different name by acquiring a company with a different name. Has nothing to do with Bühler, but everybody actually knows that Bühler is financially supporting all that. So there is a kind of legitimacy by a market leader that supports the initiatives, but the actual brand is not the same brand as Bühler. The company that exercises, that distributes the insects, that makes hamburgers from insects and all these kind of food examples, they are not operating under the same brand. They are loosely connected to the mainstream brand, but they have another name called Protix, of which everybody in the street knows that it's supported by Bühler, but it's not actually Bühler. It's like a low-cost label or a white label for a branded company. And all these kind of decisions is something that you have to take when you want to engage in corporate innovation, because you need to implement corporate innovation within a setting that is already there. So are you going to have a label for unperfected products? How are you going to communicate to clients that the product is still under development? How are you going to price that? How are you going to make sure that the high quality of your mainstream corporate brand is preserved, even if you introduce something in the market that is innovative, challenging, but maybe not of the quality yet that your typical mainstream customer wants? The duration of the program is 2 days, so we basically discuss all these things. We have some guest speakers from companies like Bosch, Swisscom, that are quite leading in these environments of corporate innovations in different sectors. Swisscom is a telecommunications sector. They created the Pirate Hubs. Pirate Hubs is a very innovative way of engaging with startups and incenting people inside the company in order to build up business cases. They used Adobe Illustrator as a benchmark and used the Kickbox thing from Adobe Illustrator to create a structure and give them some processes. And we discussed the experiences of the company, of the people that have gone through it, and the transfer of some of the projects to the business unit today. We also have the example of Bosch, which has a long tradition in corporate innovation, which is a foundation as a company, which has its interesting remarks about interesting implications about long versus short-term shareholder and stakeholders, and who have created the Business Model Innovation Lab, where they work together with leading business schools in order to develop a program, a process that is modeled after the lean startup canvas, but adjusted to their own purposes, and that is now experimenting with exit strategies that are useful for Bosch, such as the electrical battery thing that we see nowadays in most bicycles, where we have a 15-year project that has been exited successful within a ground of projects that are typically not exited successful. So I'm the program leader, and then we have some faculty coming in to discuss all these aspects and apply them through concepts to your companies if you participate. That's all I wanted to say. So I'm open for questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Bart, I'm just having a look to see. There's nobody submitted any questions, so if you do have any questions, please let us know by either typing them in the questions box or by raising your hand. So we'll wait a few more minutes just to see if anybody has got any questions. If you have any questions in the future, you can also email myself. My email address is on the screen on the last slide. So if you need to rush off now and don't have time, then please email me, and I'll also be in touch with a copy of the slides and a recording of the webinar later on. So if you have any questions then please get back to me. There is a question from Benam Shaggy about is this model viable within the government organizations such as NHS hospitals?
Yes, so we have quite a lot of non-profit or semi-non-profit innovation examples in the program. So it's not a particular model, although we discuss a lot of private companies. There's a lot, especially in hospitals and government innovation. There's also a very similar problem that goes on. So we try to give examples from different industries, including the public sector.
Okay, I hope that answered your questions. Just seeing if there's anything. No, I can't see anything else. Yeah, I can't see any other questions. So just having a look to see if anybody raised their hand. No. So if you've, yeah, as you said, if you've got any more. If you've got any more questions, then please just get in touch by email. Otherwise, we will close the webinar. And thank you very much for attending. And hopefully we'll see you on the program in the very near future.